Hey everyone, welcome back to Apologetics. Super excited that you're joining us today to have Dr. Geraint Lewis. He's Professor of Astrophysics at the Sydney Institute for Astronomy, part of the University of Sydney. He's done a lot of work on all kinds of things in cosmology and astrophysics. And today we're going to talk about like the data fine tuning and like what Geraint, as an atheist, like thinks with regards to that data. So, Geraint, welcome. Geraint, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm super excited for this conversation, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you because obviously, like on my channel, we get a lot of like different like Christians and atheists that listen, but a lot of times when we talk about fine tuning, I get like the Christian side of things. So I'm super excited to see like more of like your side of things, where like you're kind of like a believer in fine tuning, but like you don't take it like the theism route that others do. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for this conversation. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Okay.
So, Grant, just to start us off, do you want to just give a little bit of an introduction, like who you are and like what got you interested in topics like we're talking about today?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a professor of astrophysics at the University of Sydney. I've been there for 20 years now. And my sort of main research area is the dark side of the universe. So I'm very interested in the dominant dark matter and dark energy, which basically shape the evolution of the universe. So I've got a whole bunch of observational and theoretical programs, which I'm trying to look at that side of what's going on when we look through our telescopes. But I've also got an interest in the bigger kind of picture. So, an awful lot of cosmology focuses on this universe and only really cares about what you can see through your telescope. But I like to look at the bigger questions as well as, where did the universe come from? Is it related to something that existed before? Are we part of something bigger in terms of a multiverse, etc.? So I like to at least ponder those kind of questions. I'm not a philosopher. I don't have any philosophical training, but I do like to talk to people about these bigger questions.
That's super cool, Geraint. So let's get into like what is this data of like fine tuning? So obviously you co-wrote a book with like Luke Barnes, A Fortunate Universe, and like Luke Barnes is a Christian. Like what exactly is the data fine tuning that we're exploring here that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, I think it's important to remember that when we're talking about fine tuning, the starting point is the fact that our physical laws are written in mathematics. So we can play, we can build our own universes by just messing around with the mathematics. So we can actually, try and represent our universe by taking the mathematics that we see for the physics around us. And as you know, that in these equations are these numbers, which the theory doesn't tell us what these numbers should be. Things like the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the fine structure constant, etc. These numbers are needed for our physical theories to work, but the only way we can get these numbers is by asking nature. So we need to do experiments, and once we've got those numbers, we can then predict what we're going to see when stars evolve or galaxies collide or something like that. But then there's a temptation, right? I mean, physicists also love a little bit of counterfactual stuff, right? You ask yourself the question, well, what happens if things were slightly different? What if I, instead of having a fine structure constant of this value, I put in that value? And because the fundamental physics acts at the smallest scales and then works its way up, the universe is, the tail wagging the dog kind of thing, right? It's the small scale which gets written into the large scale universe. Messing around with these fundamental constants will give you a radically different kind of universe. So if you start with the premise that what if these fundamental constants could be different, and ask yourself the question, what kind of universes you create, what you find is it's very easy to create dead and sterile universes. And importantly, for the question of fine tuning, what you end up with are universes that lack any complexity. So in our universe, the complexity is written into things like the periodic table, the fact that we've got 92 elements, and we can add those together in a myriad of different ways. Of course, carbon is one of the important ones. And you can build up different molecules, and those molecules can interact, and eventually you get to us sitting here talking. If you rob a universe of the ability to host complexity, then you also rob it of the ability of information processing, energy processing, etc. You basically rob it of all the sort of fundamental aspects of what you think life would require. So, a universe of just a sea of neutrons, you're never going to produce any thinking creatures in those universes. So the entire fine-tuning question comes back to, I said, thinking about if fundamental constants were different, we easily make dead universes. So the question is, why do we find ourselves in a universe that hosts complexity?
So like we're looking at like the big picture fine tuning, like we have these physical laws that kind of like undergird everything. Like everything's kind of like follows the course of these physical laws in some sense. And like when we look at like trying to understand like what are these physical laws, we have math. We use like math to kind of describe these laws. And like what you're like the fine tuning like proponents are saying is like, hey, there's a lot of different other like maths that we can use to describe these physical laws that lead to like way wacky things. Where we don't have a universe that allows for things like complexity, which is going to give us like the complex life that we want. And that's kind of like where the fine tuning kind of plays in.
Yes, but in fact, there are multiple levels here, right? So step one is just adjusting the constants from our universe to come up with other universes. But then, as you said, it's a mathematical structure. And so if you go further, you can play with the mathematics and come up with different mathematics inside of a universe. We could add new forces or add new dimensions or things like that. And essentially doing any of those kind of things tends to be really bad for the prospect of life in a universe. We know that if we reduce the number of spatial dimensions from 3 to 2, then complexity in 2 dimensions is very difficult, right? To basically, I don't know if you've read Abbott's book Flatland from the 1800s.
I've not.
Okay, but even back then they realized that 2-dimensional life would be a difficult thing to do, right? Because we take advantage of our 3-dimensional structure to pass food through ourselves, etc. You can't do that in 2 dimensions without coming up with some sort of weird, freaky kind of biology stuff. And then if you start adding dimensions, then things like predictability go out the window. So if you imagine that we lived in a universe that had 2 dimensions of time, right? Now, it's hard for us to even imagine what that means, but I can write down the equations to put in an extra dimension of time. And then, so what that does for you, of course, is that predictability becomes very messy because you have to worry about what's going on in those 2 time dimensions. And one of the nice things about physics is that, we have a future, we have a past, and we don't have to worry about a future over there and a future over here and how they're related.
Yeah, it's super helpful. Like looking at like, hey, there's different like layers of like fine tuning. So like, do you think like what are some like examples? Looking at fine tuning, like what would you bring forward to say like, hey, there is this question of like why we have a universe that's going to allow for like this complex life to come into existence?
Oh, well, look, there's so many of them. I mean, I've got a few that I personally like to do with things like the masses of the fundamental particles, right? So we live in a universe where, at the fundamental level, we've got these particles, we have quarks and we have leptons. And the most famous lepton is the electron, right? It's the one that, orbits every single atom of our body, right? And then we have the quarks, and it's the quarks that make up the protons and the neutrons, which are the building blocks of matter. And one of the things is that the masses of the quarks means that the lowest mass baryon, as it's called, the lowest mass member of this family is the proton. So the neutron is very, very slightly more massive than the proton, which means that neutrons can decay into protons, but protons are effectively stable. Now, if we messed around with the masses of the quarks, we could change that. We could change the lowest mass particle to be the neutron rather than the proton, which would mean protons decay into neutrons, but neutrons are really useless. They're not charged. They're useful for mass and bulking up the nucleus of your atom, but you can't create an atom out of just neutrons. So you can already start to play with these masses, and you don't have to play with them very much. I mean, the neutron is only slightly more massive than the proton. You can even play other games where you can adjust those masses again, and you get that your lowest mass baryon is a particle known as, physicists are rubbish at naming things. It's called the delta plus plus. Okay, so it looks like a proton, but it has a charge of 2 rather than 1. So that means it looks like helium rather than hydrogen. And of course, one of the things that we have in our universe is that we get lots of things occurring because Stars are made of hydrogen. Hydrogen burns into heavier elements, etc. Helium is kind of useless. It doesn't form molecules, right? It's just one of those rubbishy kind of molecules that we have in the universe. It's not very good for adding to the complexity. So just playing around with those fundamental masses can change the constituent nature of the universe on a very small scale. And then that has big implications on the large scale universe.
Okay, that's super helpful. And what I want to do for our audiences know, like we've done a lot of like in-depth conversations at the data fine tuning. So I kind of want to leave it like the data there for there and like say like, hey, there is this like big question. And what I wonder is like Geraint, like for you, like as an atheist, like why do we need an explanation for fine tuning? Like why can't like someone just say like, hey, it's just the way it is and just move on and like that's the end of the story?
Well, because physicists don't like that kind of answer, right? I mean, if you get to the point where you have to say, right, there is no explanation for this thing that's in front of me, that then itself becomes a mystery of why is there no explanation? Okay, so let me give you an example. So remember, I sort of said the starting premise was if the fundamental constants could be different, we get different universes. Now, there are those that say that we can't even ask that question because we don't know if the fundamental constants could be different. But if they weren't, imagine that they were exactly the values that we measure and there's no prospect of them being something else. So imagine that we got to an ultimate theory that predicted what the fundamental constants would be. So the speed of light would be some mathematical relationship involving pi and e and all the other mathematical constants. No freedom, okay? So we'd end up with a theory that would explain everything. But then the next question is, well, why this theory, right? Because, in mathematics, you start off with axioms and you build up your mathematics, and we have a set of axioms that builds up the mathematics for our universe. Well, why did we end up with this particular theory for this universe? And as a physicist, I would say, well, I think there has to be something deeper, something bigger than the physics itself that has to explain, why this particular sort of combination of mathematics and constants, even though they're set perfectly with just the maths in front of me. So for me, then that would lead into the question of, well, where did the universe come from? How did this mathematics get written into the universe? And what was the process behind that? And as you said, being an atheist, for me, it would have to be a physical process, which means that ultimately, in a physicist viewpoint, I should at some point be able to come up with the bigger mathematics that explains where our subset of mathematics came from.
Okay, yeah, it's super helpful. And like I think it's like I like how you emphasize like as a scientist, like you want to explain things like as far as you can. Like so if like we have this question of like we have this like apparent anomaly of like there being like this life permanent universe when it looks like there's a lot more likely chance that there's not, then like yeah, like we should pursue an explanation for it. Like it's a good thing for us to do. And it would make sense that if there's an anomaly, there probably is an explanation. Is that fair?
But again, you have to be careful with the word anomaly, right?
Okay.
I mean, anomaly means you're already singling something out as being a bit weird, right? It might be that there's nothing particularly weird about our universe. It might be that the universe created machine, or however our universe came into being, can only produce universes like this. And this is what we would like to find, right? Or it spits universes out with random combinations, and then we have to invoke the anthropic principle. But there is, I think, a deeper question hidden in fine-tuning, and for me, there is a physical solution somewhere that we need to find.
Okay, so I'm curious then, like Geraint, like in your opinion, like what is your explanation? If we're gonna say like what is a fine-tuning? You talked about there being like some sort of deeper explanation. Maybe you have all the answers and you like got 100% right. But like what do you think? Like when you're like what theory would you like lean towards as like your best explanation of like why there's fine-tuning?
Yeah. Oh well, I'm going to take a small step backwards. As you mentioned, I wrote the book with Luke, and Luke is a Christian, right? And one of the reasons we wrote the book is we got tired of people telling us what the answer is, right?
Yeah.
So, you come from the scientific perspective, they say, well, this is the answer. You come from the theistic perspective, they say, this is the answer. And of course, you got two different answers. And part of the reason that we wanted to write the book was to outline the fact that fine-tuning is a physical question, right? So it's something that physics should worry about. And then in the last chapter, what we wanted to do is say that really nobody has the answer. What we did is we said, right, cards on the table that we think that this is a possibility, this is a possibility, this is a possibility. But there are other ones that we probably haven't thought of yet as well, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my leaning would be towards this notion of a multiverse, the notion that the Big Bang was not the only sort of creation event that's ever occurred in the overall life of all the universes, right? The universes are essentially being created essentially all the time through the multiverse, and that there is some process in there, and that process, when the universe is born, the laws of physics get written into that universe through the formation process. And I still think that it's, again, possibly a roll of the dice kind of thing, and that most universes in the multiverse are actually those dead and sterile universes. And, we should not be that surprised to find ourselves in a universe that can host life. As, where else would we expect to find ourselves?
Well, first, I just want to emphasize, I appreciate you and Luke, and as I read the book, I felt the same thing, your humility in saying, first outlining the problem, there's this fine tuning, it's a physical problem. Like, physicists need to think about this problem. Like, it's not something just for the philosophers and theologians and things like this. Like, we have this physical problem. And I appreciate you guys saying oh, well, you read this whole book and now here's the answer, problem solved, pack up. That's not the approach you guys take. And I really appreciate that, because it's not like any of us have the whole 9 yards and have it all figured out. So yeah, I really appreciate both your humility and kind of that taking that approach. That's great. So then here's what I'm wondering, so we're thinking about the multiverse hypothesis, someone. So then I'm wondering, so someone might ask well, why is there this multiverse generator? Is this the end of the chain of explanation, or what's going on here? So we could explain maybe fine tuning through some sort of multiverse generator creator, something like this. If I'm having you right, then what explains that multiverse creating machine thingy majiggy? What do you think?
Well, okay, so you run into the small child problem here, which is the but why, right?
Yeah.
So there is the question of what answer would satisfy you, right? When you say, okay, now I sort of understand that. If you ever listen to lectures by people like Richard Feynman, where he points out that even if you want to explain what is a magnetic field to somebody, at some point you have to say, well, I can no longer do any other analogies. This is what it is. What explanation will satisfy you, kind of thing. So we can always say, right, okay, I can talk about fine tuning in the context of a multiverse, and if I want to then take it one step higher, ask where did the multiverse come from? And seeing that we don't even have a theory for a multiverse, right? A multiverse is not a theory. A multiverse is an idea, hypothesis. It's a dream, right? Because we don't have mathematics to describe it. We can't even start to tackle that question, right? Because all I'm doing, if I want to sort of say where did the multiverse come from, I'm just heaping speculation on speculation. And fair enough, I could probably get seats at the table for some philosophical conference where I could wax lyrical about that kind of stuff. But you've stopped doing science at some level then. You've stopped doing science at some level then, right? So what we really need to do before we can start to dig down into that deeper question is deal with what's in front of us first, right? First question is the multiverse a realistic solution to fine tuning? I think it is. If it is, then what mathematics do I need to describe the multiverse? Do I already have the tool set in the laws of physics that I've worked out in this universe to talk about other universes? Or is there a mathematical breakthrough, a new mathematics, or something that's required before I can talk about how a multiverse operates? When I eventually get to that stage where I think I've got to work in hypothesis model for a multiverse, then I think I can start to ask the bigger question, well, where does this fit into the overall picture? And it might be, again, that you you run up against the same problem that you fill up the mathematics. There's no freedom left, and you get to that point, and you are left with the question: where did the mathematics of the multiverse come from? Now, I don't know, have you read any of Max Tegmark's work?
I have not.
Okay, so
Max
Tegmark, he wrote a book called, I think it was called The Mathematical Universe, where essentially he was proposing that we write down equations, but he was saying that there's actually more to the universe than the equations, that the universe itself is mathematics being processed somehow, right?
Okay.
And so that the universe itself, if you could get in the really small scale, is actually little calculations going on. And he said, well, then you could imagine that in this space of mathematical calculations, all possible mathematical calculations are going on. So all of the multiverse and all the multiverses and multiverses are in this mathematical calculation. And then you have to ask yourself, well, where are these calculations being carried out? And the answer is, well, it's the fundamental stuff of the universe. It might not have an explanation in a sense that would satisfy you, right? It might be one of those things that at the end of the day just is. And again, the physicists don't like that because it's almost a defeatist attitude, right? In the sense that you've said, I can't go any further with these ideas, and we hate that. But it might be the case that we end up at that point.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate that. And I think there's something really right about what you're saying, Geraint. Like, I think everyone's gonna have to end at some sort of like explanation and say like that's the way it is. Like, as a theist, like I'm gonna have to say like God exists and like that's just foundational it is, or like the foundation's like perfect. And that's the way, like something along those lines I'm probably gonna have to do, and like put my foot down and say like this is the way things are, and it's not gonna have a further explanation. Like and I think there's something right. Like I think like even if you're gonna say like maybe there's like an infinite, like there, before this like universe or like Big Bang, there's another one like going all the way back. You kind of like, well, yeah, it's just the way it is. Like it seems like to me, everyone has to like posit. I think if you press further enough, just something where they're just gonna say like, yeah, like that's the way it is, and like stop the 5-year-old just asking like, what about this? What about this? To me, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, but of course, one of the interesting things in this entire I put debate in inverted commas because it's often a shouting match. It's quite clear that different directions for solutions are more satisfying for different people, right? We're individuals, and those that go down the theistic as opposed to the atheistic viewpoint, of course, have very different solutions to the perceived problem. For those who think about it, I know some people don't think about it at all. And I think at some level we have to appreciate that some of this, again, I'm choosing my words very carefully, is personal preference. Is that the right word? I mean, we
all see things differently. So
yeah. So it's the Beatles philosophy, isn't it? Right, whatever gets you through the night. It's that if you think that this is an answer that you're okay with, then I think that's kind of fine. But we have to live with the fact that as individuals, different people see different solutions. And from the atheistic side, of course, me thinking that this is a physical problem means that I will keep digging until I can really dig no further into why the universe is the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's good, Geraint. And I think it emphasizes like we're all going to see things differently. Like and it just highlights like the person-based nature of like justification. Like me and you, like we have different like backgrounds and experiences, and like that's going to impact how we look at like the data of fine-tuning. And we have to realize that because like there's people that are like rational and they disagree with you, and there's people that are rational and disagree with me. I think that's important. So I want to backtrack for a sec because this kind of came to my mind as you were talking about like the multiverse. So like if you're going to lean towards like some sort of multiverse theory, is it the data of like fine tuning that pushes you there? So like I'm thinking like say fine tuning isn't a problem and you could just like not have to like it wasn't like a very like improbable event to have a fine tuned universe like complex life like you and me. Would you still hold to like a multiverse for other reasons? You think like a multiverse is a great theory that combines a bunch of things together? or is it the fine tuning it's mostly pushing you that way? Yeah, what's your take on that?
Well, I guess I have wondered about, so for me, right, the universe's origins, right? Where did the universe come from? And the Big Bang picture, growth of the universe, etc. And we have this time equals zero, the birth point of the universe. And I find that unsatisfactory, that was the start of space and time, and that before that there was a true nothing, right? So, Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, posits that idea that possibly that was the initial start point, and there really was a true nothing before that point. And of course, we can get together with the philosophers and argue about the meaning of nothing. But I personally find that unsatisfying. I don't completely disregard it in that I think it's a potential. But for me, I think that there has to be a connection to something else, in the sense that our universe came from an existing process, an existing space-time structure, etc. Now, there's a couple of potential views that you can take. You could either have a universe which is sort of born, lives, dies, born, lives, dies, born, lives, dies, etc. And so you've got these cycles of the universe. And of course, they've come in and out of fashion for a long, long time. And there's a current version called the ekpyrotic universe by Steinhardt and Turok. Right? So this is essentially this idea that the universe is born, lives for a period of time, recollapses, born, lives for a period of time, etc. So then you've got this sort of like linear life of the universe. There's still one universe, but we just live along. But then you sort of think, well, okay, I can add complexity to that picture. Why produce one universe when you could produce 2 or 10 or 10 to the 10 or some number? Because there's no space restriction, no time restriction, etc. And at some level, there's also restrictions which we think of based upon the physics that we have in our universe that doesn't necessarily hold in the space of the multiverse. And so I thought, yeah, well, if you could create one universe, why stop there? And why doesn't the process continue, produce other universes, etc.? And so you could very naturally wave your hands towards a multiverse picture very easily by just thinking about, well, why was our universe born at all, right? And if there's a process, then it going off once seems kind of bizarre when it could be a semi-infinite number of times.
Okay, yeah, I think that's super helpful. So thanks for the clarity, Geraint. So as we move into like the second half, what I'd love to do is talk about like why you think this explanation may be better, like in your view, than say like a theism. So like obviously like your co-author Luke Barnes, like he's a theist, and like I'm a theist. So I'm curious, like in your view, like what makes like your theory of like a multiverse? Why would you see this like, and why in your mind is this more plausible than like saying like maybe there's a God that fine-tuned the universe or something else along like a theistic side of things?
Okay, so again, it's that partly down to background, right? I've been sort of like an atheist for quite a long time. I mean, I wasn't really raised in a particularly religious tradition, but I did sort of skirt with some religion when I was younger. But when I went down that science route and I read some of the philosophy around science versus religion, there was a time when Stephen Jay Gould was writing a lot about this kind of stuff. I realized that for me, to explain the physical world, what was needed were the equations in front of me. Okay. And I also, not a biologist, but I've read an awful lot of evolutionary biology and the history of evolutionary biology and etc. Understand all of the various arguments, God of the gaps, blah, blah, blah. So for me, I could see that the picture of science as being the description of the universe worked really well. And that therefore you didn't need didn't need a hand in there to control the way the electrons fly around the nucleus of an atom, etc. So I got that sort of very natural worldview that there's just nature equations, and that's the way that the universe works. And I guess that has become stronger over my career in that, of course, nowhere in my research papers when I'm studying dark matter or dark energy, gravitational lenses, etc., do I need to invoke any sort of spiritual kind of explanation of what we see through a telescope. And in fact, if I did, I'm pretty sure my paper would be rejected from the journal anyway, right? So, and Luke, of course, is the same. Luke, I don't want to put words into Luke's mouth, but no, Luke is a practicing scientist, and he writes scientific papers, and we write scientific papers together, and we know that those papers do not need or require any sort of hand of God in there to explain what it is we're trying to explain. So for me, that kind of picture that things are driven by the fundamental forces, the fundamental masses of objects, is just something I project onto a larger scale, right? If I ask the question, so if I'll put it this way. So anytime I'm faced with a question of trying to understand something, right? My first principles are, right, what are the laws of physics that apply here? Okay. And that works, of course, explaining star formation and said orbits of planets, etc. Then you go to the bigger questions of like, where did the universe come from, right? And how is it related possibly to other structures and to the fine-tuning question? Well, it would be, it would not be me following my scientific nose to suddenly look at that question and say, well, I need a different answer for that, right? Because I don't know, because it's a bigger question. But to me, they're all scientific questions that should be answered with science. I personally don't need to have that that additional hypothesis for explaining things I can't explain. If things aren't explained at the moment, I still think that if I hit it hard enough with a physics hammer, eventually I will find out how it works in terms of physics. So, so for me, the question of a theistic solution to fine tuning isn't really on the table. In that, that's not me whacking things with a physics hammer, right? That's me deciding that this is the solution. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not happy in entertaining some alternative ideas, right? We all know about the simulation hypothesis and the notion that we are a simulation running on a computer in a universe above. I mean, that to me doesn't sound completely outlandish. It's not that a million miles away from what Max Tegmark is suggesting, right? That we are just basically mathematical calculations, and this is all fiction, really, right? Well, at some level, it's already fiction. Your brain is putting together some sort of lie to keep you happy about what's going on around you. So I can entertain that idea as a philosophically interesting idea. I can see that it is a potential, but it's more fanciful than I think what a physical solution would be, right? So again, physical solution, either there's a theory of everything that explains everything, either there's a multiverse, or some other physical process we haven't quite understood that leads to fine-tuning.
That's really helpful, and I think it brings a lot of clarity, Geraint, because I think there's something right about what you're saying. So if you think about like science, like I'm reading a book like on science right now, it's called like A Brief History of Everything. Like it's an older book, and you look at you can read a whole science book and there's no need for like a supernatural agency or something like that. And what you're trying to bring out here is from a simplicity point of view, it was well, if we can use that to explain all this, why do we need to go any further? Looking at the question of fine tuning, if we can stick to this science stuff to explain everything that we're looking at now, why can't we just keep doing that? So yeah, I think there's something really helpful about what you're saying from a simplicity point. So I wanted to emphasize that to the audience, because obviously ultimately I disagree with you, but like I see where you're coming from, and that does make a lot of sense to me. Because it is like a good argument from simplicity to show like this view is makes some sense.
Yeah. And as we said earlier on, I'm not too upset that we disagree, right? I mean, I said we're individuals. We probably disagree on our favorite music, favorite movies, and all kinds of other things as well, right? So, again, I think it's important to remember that science is not this one single monolithic endeavor where we're all basically yes men and women. We just shuffle everything forward. It's made up of individuals, and there are a whole range of viewpoints, and the thing evolves with time about which path that we're going to go down. And this is part of the reason why we wrote the book, is when we got tired of people telling us that they know the answer to fine-tuning, when we know that nobody knows the answer to fine-tuning, right? So I'm happy for you to have your hypothesis. I'm happy for my hypothesis. As the data comes in, we'll have to juggle our hypotheses, see which one survives and which one doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's great. So one thing I wonder about, like looking at these two hypotheses, is something I've thought about, like when looking at this question, is just would we really like expect God to be like in between like these like scientific like anomalies? Switching directions a tiny bit here, but on the same page. So I'm thinking can it really count against like a theistic like account of things? If we're gonna say I'm gonna say well, what if God just creates a universe where like he wants scientific discovery and he wants things to flow like a natural course of things? Like if that's the case, then we wouldn't expect there to be like we have to you'd be writing your paper and it's like A causes B, B causes C, God, D causes Z, like in the gap. To me, it seems plausible that there'd be like a more like ordered, structured universe then. So my question then for you would be what do you think about that? Would you expect if God exists, would he have this kind of intervention that's super obvious? I know I'm getting you a little pushing you out of the scientist cap for a little bit here, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, I'm not a philosopher of religion, but of course, clearly a lot of people think that God does play a role in their daily lives, and there are people that believe in miracles, which is basically God bending the rules of physics for individual people. So where do you want to draw the line, right? In that, do you have an interventionist God who plays a daily role in people's lives? Then why doesn't he play a role in the laws of physics, right? Why can't I find him? Why can't I find a process where I can't explain by the laws of physics and say, oh, this needs a supreme being in here? Or why does God only step in to start the universe, right? Now, is it really, has he set us up as a holiday project and he's gone away and he's going to come back and take a look later? Or is it, why just then and not, the universe is almost 14 billion years old, right? As modern humans, we've been around for a few 100,000 years. So, what was God doing in that intervening almost 14 billion years? I don't know. Again, I'm not a religious philosopher. I couldn't start to answer, but it is one of those questions which, in my mind, is you're trying not you personally, but the endeavor of religion seems to have more than a single picture of what this God is and what they do and how they get involved, and I think that can lead to part of the arguments that we have here, in the sense I said, if you have a God that produces miracles and therefore defies the laws of physics, they are open to the laws of physics and science, right? We could do an experiment, come into the lab and let's do a miracle, and we can go, whoa, we have evidence here that laws of physics are broken at some level and something's stepping in. But instead, if you want to hide God in just the start of the universe, then for me, it seems a really strange thing to want to do. And again, set the universe off as a soup of ultra high energy particles and radiation and expect that in 14 billion years, it's all going to cool down such that we are sitting here talking, right? So again, where was the hand of God over the last 14 billion years? And if there had been interventions on a reasonable scale, forming stars or galaxies, etc., we would notice, right? It would be part of the law somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. And I'll kind of leave it to the audience to chew on that. And I got you in that as well. So we have about 10 minutes left or so. Is there any other topics Geraint, that you want to bring up or talk about before we wrap up here?
I guess as a sideline, with regards to what we've been speaking about, I'm going to try not to become a bit kumbaya here, right? it would be nice if there was more dialogue between the theistic and atheistic sides, right? So I've been involved in a number of these things now, and where I've spoken, to both sides.
Yeah.
And the antagonism is rather exhausting, right? I don't know when it became a one-upmanship kind of game to try and put down the other side. And I was invited onto something to do a recording, and then before I knew it, somebody was saying that there is a scientific war on religion, and it's like, where is this scientific war on religion? And of course, what they mean is that people like Dawkins and Krauss say things, but they don't actually represent scientists. And I just said, I just wish there would be more discussion like this, right? So people can really see what the other side are really thinking, rather than just the extremes yelling at each other from the hills. So I mean, we wrote the book. The book is now 6 years old, I think, and I don't think anything's changed on that front. I still see the rebel rousers on both sides, and I said that we can point to the publicity sort of hounds on science. I said Dawkins, Krauss, deGrasse Tyson, etc., who make these comments, and then it just becomes flame wars. So I think a bit more restrained dialogue would be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super good, and I think we just gotta have more conversations with each other, like conversations like this, and having people on different ends of the things that can just talk about these things, and just have a conversation. I feel either if in the middle of a tense debate, or if you're just doing a lecture to an audience where everyone's on your side, it's very easy to kind of rile up the crowd and push things out. When you have conversations like this, I think it helps to shed clarity. And obviously your book with Luke is a great example. But then we got to spread that to people that may not think the same way as you and I would hope to be more kumbaya. For me personally, it's hard for me to call out if I call out an atheist and say hey, you're not being very charitable to my side, it's a lot harder for me in my experience to reach them than maybe it would be for an atheist to reach them. But for me, if I see Christians or theists doing being uncharitable, I feel it's easier for me to say hey, you got to be charitable to the other side. And I've seen this in other channels. There's channels Emerson Green on YouTube, or there's Christians Christian Idealism, where they're pushing this kind of this path forward where we can just have conversations. I think that's disarming when you can see people that you really respect, just have a conversation with someone you disagree with. I think that's very disarming to people and helps them. And we got, like you said, we got a long ways to go. And I don't know if things have changed, like you said, in the past 6 years, but I feel conversations like this and more of them, if there's a path, it seems that's got to be the way forward. Is the way I see it. So,
and similarly, I mean, on things like the discussions on fine tuning, right? One of the things I find is I watch a few YouTube videos from the theistic side as well, right? And it's quite clear that on the theistic side, the understanding of the physics of fine tuning can be a little bit ropey.
Yeah.
So, having some scientists on board, and because you've got Luke understands this kind of stuff, so you've got a proper scientist's viewpoint, but having more scientists involved in the overall discussion can either say, yes, this is a problem, that isn't a problem, etc., can build up a proper vision of what we are talking about. Because often, as I said, when people are arguing, they shout past each other and things are thrown, and they might not even be arguing about the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good, and hopefully, like, this conversation can just do like its little piece in helping to like push things further in both of us. And it's just one person at a time, and if we can win one person at a time, and things got to be better if we can get people one person at a time. So, anything else, Geraint? I've really enjoyed this conversation, Geraint. Why can I not get that name right? It's killing me. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, you're not the first. It's because it's a Welsh name, and people change the G automatically. So complete aside, I introduced myself as Geraint, and people respond to me with Geraint straight away. I think they assume that I can't even pronounce my own name, so I'm used to it.
Well, this conversation has been peaceful, but something that may be hostile is like we got Wales versus USA in the World Cup coming up in a couple months. Like,
yeah,
you have any opinion on that? Like, that's gonna be interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, it's the first time we've been in the World Cup for quite a while. Yeah. We're not the greatest soccer nation. If it was a rugby match, I think I'd feel more confident. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Again, look, I am very proud of my home country. I want them to do well, but it's not the end of the world if they don't come away with a big trophy at the end of the tournament. The fact that they qualified, that's pretty good.
Well, I think the Americans that care about soccer are gonna like go down streets and with torches and pitchforks if we lose. So it's maybe a little bit different over here.
Yeah, I think, haven't we got England in the same group as well?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So
yeah. So that's where the real rivalry starts, is Wales versus England, but not Wales versus the USA.
We'll take it. Great. This has been a super fun conversation. Any way people can what's the best way for people to follow and connect with you if they want to see more of you and your work?
Okay, I'm on Twitter at cosmic_horizons, and I've got a website, geraintflewis.com, which I need to get back to. I've been teaching. I haven't had a chance to update things recently, but I do post various things there as well. And look, I'm happy to take questions either on Twitter or via my website, and I always try and answer a decent question.
Well, Geraint, I'll put a link down below where people can follow you, connect with you. But thank you so much. This has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, I encourage people to check out Geraint's work. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. This is here in Apologetics. If you're new, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Really appreciate you and support. And if you value what we do, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/here in Apologetics. That'd be huge. That's it for today. God bless, and we'll catch you next time.